took off, why, it was still twilight in England. The planes formed up, flying around the field, and formed up, and then we headed out of there. But we headed west, so we could make a big loop around the invasion fleet that was going in.
Most of the fellows that you talk to that went over that, both Omaha or Utah Beach, either one, it looked like you could almost walk across the ship to ship, at all sizes and all kinds. It was awesome, absolutely awesome.
Weather was real bad, stormy and raining, and all of that, and I'm sure that the pilot of that C-47 that we were riding in, when he saw all that flak and all of that, and the flak rattling off our wings that you could hear, you know. And I'm sure that when he got us to a place where he thought it was a good, safe place to jump, he gave us the green light, and out we went.
I was having trouble getting out of my parachute, and then I heard these footsteps coming toward me. So I quickly rolled over and got my rifle out, and I was just bringing it up to aim, and this big cow stuck its head right at me and mooed right in my face. I was glad it was a cow.
And then when it got daylight, we just heard some firing in an area up ahead, and we decided to move up there and join the groups. And then I saw these guys had been hit in the night. And then it wasn't training anymore. You saw the guys had been hit bad, and they were bleeding and laid open and so on. Then you realize this is real stuff here.
The Germans demonstrated the capabilities of an all-out aerial invasion with their attack on Crete, which they managed to capture exclusively with air transported and parachute troops. Ironically, the Germans looked at their losses in Crete and said, never again. The Americans looked at the capture of Crete and said, we need to scale up. So the Americans began the creation of airborne divisions, and they conducted many division-level operations in the war, the most famous of which being the Normandy operation. The night before D-Day, the United States put 2 parachute divisions, parachute and glider, airborne divisions, into Normandy, and the British put in 1.
The naval bombardment, the landings, all of that is designed to overcome the beach defenses. But the next hurdle to overcome is the German mobile reserves, because the Germans can't defend everywhere. So the Germans have central reserves that are designed to counterattack as soon as the Allies come ashore while they're still disorganized. And the principal mission of the airborne troops is to prevent that from happening. The airborne units become the elite infantry of the Army, because once you put those units in to combat and they begin coming apart, they have the ability, the training, and the instinct to begin reassembling themselves under fire and continue forward. And so they have much more ability to sustain combat in a hostile environment than most other people do, just by the unique nature of the experience that they've trained for.
Well, we trained pretty heavy in England. I don't think I ever went through a problem or a CPX exercise that somebody wasn't killed. I mean, there was a lot of casualties. Either the gliders would malfunction, sometimes the plane would take off and pull the nose out of it, and the glider would crash. But so what? It didn't hit us, so we didn't worry about it.
We had intensive training. I remember being on a practice jump in England with Colonel Schwartz. He was an ornery, belligerent type. And a storm came up, a violent storm rather, and word went out on the radios to cancel flights, come back. And he acted like he did not hear the message. He did, but he ignored it, and he jumped us. And it was wintertime. I remember landing in a cabbage field patch. The cabbages were this big around and frozen like bricks. And with that strong wind, several guys were knocked out, several broke their legs. I think one broke his back.
We spent several weeks, a month, preparing for the drop in Normandy. In the last week, we got word that a German unit had moved into the exact area where we were going to jump in Normandy. So the mission was changed, and we were moved to the area around St. Mary-ad-Lys. It was always amazing to me why the Germans, we always thought they had great intelligence, that is, military intelligence, and they knew nothing about what we were going to do.
The interesting thing about all the security measures is that, in fact, the Germans didn't have a clue that we had mounted a huge invasion force, a huge airborne force. And even with photo reconnaissance and radio intercept, at which they were very good, the Germans never were able to pinpoint and say, okay, this is how many troops are going to come ashore where. Even when they began to suspect there was going to be an invasion, there's no indication they were able to get any idea of the size of the invasion. In fact, they so badly miscalculated, they thought it was a feint. They thought there was another major invasion coming right after Normandy.
Security was really tight. A week before D-Day, and of course they put that thing off a couple times. We were put in a gated, fenced compound that wasn't too far from the base we were at, and you couldn't get out of there.
They put us in this area that, yeah, they took you out of there with armed guards. They had a guard around you all the time. They'd take us out of there to a hangar in the air base there, and they had these tables that were mock-up things of Normandy.
We didn't know where we were going at the time. Then they showed us maps of where we were going without the names. It was only 3 days actually before the invasion that we knew exactly where we were going, that it was going to be France and Normandy.
Eventually, one day we were taken out to the airport, and that was supposed to be D-Day, and if I remember correctly, that was canceled, and we went back, and then went back out to the airport again.
The real problem with the delay is the psychological effect on the troops involved. When you've been building up to something for months on end, you've gotten totally psyched up to go up there and do it, and then suddenly you're told, okay, oh, wait a minute, let's stand down. That's always devastating.
We was ready to go. But when we loaded the planes that first morning and then had to sit there for an hour, then pull out again, then we got deflated, and there was a lot of hard feelings over it.
The planners anticipated that it would be some time before the Airborne would be relieved by overland troops. And as a result decided that everything that they needed to fight the battle for the first several days had to be with them, that they had to carry it with them. So in addition to their own personal gear, in addition to their own personal weapon and ammunition for it, they carried a considerable amount of extra ammunition for their own personal weapon. They carried extra grenades. They carried extra medical equipment, extra bandages and medical supplies, because there wouldn't be immediately resupply of that. So there's this whole array of things that are incidental and can be supplied from the rear in most circumstances that if they were going to need at all, they needed to carry with them.
That meant we were just going to have more extra weight. And already when you went to get on a plane, it took 2 guys to boost you to get it in. So you can imagine what it was when we went into Normandy.
You had a full field pack, of course, and you depending on what weapon you carried, you had your weapon. It never bothered me, that part of it, until we jumped Normandy. And then they fastened a British leg pack on, and I'd never heard of them before, let alone being familiar with them. And it got me into trouble.
We were really loaded down. We were packed down with everything you could carry. I had a landmine on my lap strapped to my left leg, my trench knife to my right, yeah, 3 days rations, K rations. I don't know what all we had.
Eisenhower came up and talked to us, and of course I was in the front row, And he was telling us that we could expect at least 30% casualties on landing. And he said, I want you, if you land and land safely, sell your life dearly. I'll never forget that. And, I wanted to tell him then my life wasn't for sale, but I didn't dare tell him that.
Going across that channel was the biggest sight I ever saw in my life. It was a solid mass of ships from one side or the other. I never did hear how many ships they thought was in it, but it was a pile of them. The planes that were in the air were just about the same way. It was just a steady drone. Now, we had fighters over us all the way. There was bombers going and coming, and you just think maybe the world's coming to an end or something. It was so big.
The weather was not the best. There was heavy cloud cover. They were just coming off a major storm the day before. There was anti-aircraft fire over the coast. German radar picked up the aircraft coming in. You had, and again, something people don't notice, you had a lot of inexperienced transport pilots too. They were doing a combat drop and a night combat drop to boot for the first time. So you had navigation problems. If you didn't make your turn precisely right, you were going to be completely off. There's nothing to stop you from making a mistake.
Were they frightened? I think all of them must have been frightened. One of the things that must have sustained them was the fact that everybody they were going into combat with, they'd been with for a year and a half, 2 years, through training and maneuvers and exercises and everything else. And if anything got them through that first experience, that must have had a lot to do with it.
I think we were probably more scared now, because we were venturing into the unknown as far as our experience is concerned. But there again, young, and nothing can happen to me. It might happen to the other guy, but it's not going to happen to me.
A lot of them went completely introspective, inside themselves, trying to figure, am I going to survive? Am I not going to screw up? Others would get very loud. And it's not false bravado, it's reaction to stress, extreme stress. And the biggest stress is, how am I going to react? Am I going to do the right thing? Am I going to support my buddy? Am I going to accomplish my mission? Am I not going to screw up?
When the plane took off, it took at least 2 hours to get them all flying around till they get in the right formation. Then you had to go to where you were going. And we went around the Normandy Peninsula and came in from the back side. Well, by the time we got on our way, I went to sleep. And I slept most of the way across. And I woke up and I started hearing that aircraft fire. And you could look out those plane windows and see the tracers from the machine gun fire coming up at us. Coming right at us. Those time those shells got to where the plane was, they were slowed down. They were pretty well spent. And so when they hit that air driven back by the propellers, they would curve. And we started getting those tracer bullets going right through the tail end of the plane.
Oh yeah, we were fired at, and we could hear those stuff popping through the fuselage. I don't know what it was, machine gun fire or shrapnel or whatever. We heard explosions, and we knew we were being fired on. I was rather interested in getting the hell out of there, personally.
Suddenly you stop worrying about the jump itself and landing. And that's completely secondary to the idea that somebody's about to blow the plane apart around you. Not a great percentage of the aircraft were hit. The problem is that it scattered formations. People took evasive action, and thus it contributed to the scattering of the drop itself.
The losses from air defense were more important psychologically than materially. Certainly the incidents of aircraft going down, so many people remember seeing that so vividly. that I think it had a tremendous psychological impact. I'm really not sure that the material impact was anywhere near that significant.
We could see the fire up on ahead of us, you know, tracers and anti-aircraft guns and machine guns, and fires going on down below, and so I don't know how many planes were shot down ahead of us. Our lead plane, the company commander plane, and company headquarters were shot down, and everyone killed. And as that was happening, why, instead of coming in at 500 or 600 feet, why, the pilots dropped way down and took evasive action, which is a natural thing to do. And they gave us a green light. I don't even think we had a red light, just gave us a green light, and out we went.
When we hit the mainland, a 50 caliber machine gun got on us, riddled bucket seats up and down one side of the whole plane. Pilot hollered back and wondered how many guys were hit. We checked off up and down the line, and nobody. He wouldn't believe us. He sent the co-pilot back. He went back, nope, nobody's hit. Well, when this happened, he tipped up on the side and got out of the line of formation. So there's no lights, and he was out of formation. We got strict orders not to go back with the plane, and we told him to fly back in 3 minutes, and we'd go.
We came in over the coast and flew over the coast for a few minutes. And at one time, our plane got caught in anti-aircraft fire, and the plane dove for the treetops. I think that must have been just about where the point where we were going to jump. The plane dove for the treetops and flew as fast as possible to get out of there. And before we knew it, we were over the water on the other side again. I was wondering what's going on there. We going back to England or what? Then the plane turned around, flew over the coast again, inland from the other side, flew a few minutes, and gave us the green light, and we jumped.
You've got a static line, and you hook that onto a cable that runs the length of the airplane, and then you check the guy in front of you to be sure that it's clear of his chute, and you're gone before you realize what's going on. You're so busy getting ready that you don't realize until you're gone.
When we jumped, I don't think we were more than 550 feet off the ground, but I still had a couple bullet holes in my chute. Now, I've seen tracers coming up at other jumpers, but the ones that went through mine, I'd just hear a little zip. That's all the sound you heard when it went through your silk. We ended up about 11, 12 miles from where we were supposed to be, which our designated point was St. Mary Glees.
We landed right where we were supposed to be. By morning, we were very well organized and very well situated. The other regiments had a lot worse landing. Were more scattered than we were.
St. Mary du Mont was where we were supposed to be. We weren't. I was several miles from there. I didn't see St. Mary du Mont until afternoon.
The plane was supposed to be at an elevation of about 500 feet when we jumped, and 300 when the last guy got out. And I was in about the middle of the stick. I don't remember exactly where I was, probably 6th or 8th man back when we jumped. But I remember going out and I had a rifle, carried the rifle in a bag, and I went out of that plane. And my parachute jerked me open and jerked me, and I had about 2 swings, and I'm on the ground. Wham, real quick.
A lot of Normandy, to this day, is either very heavily overgrown, with famous hedgerows, but also woodlots, isolated trees, swamp areas, marsh, and any of these are very dangerous to drop into. And then, of course, you're dropping at night. And I suspect there were an awful lot of minor injuries among the airborne troops that got lumped in with the combat casualties for the day, because I knew a lot of paratroopers in the Army, and its injuries are a fact of life in peacetime. Now you're overloaded, coming in at night into rough country, usually into country that is not where you're supposed to be, and you're just asking for injuries.
There was a lot of them that lit in the water and drowned because they had the pockets full of stuff and their guns and so on, and they couldn't swim. And some of the water was too deep, but some of it was shallow enough that they could walk on the bottom and get out of that water. And a lot of them got killed there. A lot of Americans got killed in the water.
We were just getting ready to get on those planes, and somebody came and fastened that leg pack. I don't know what was in it. I couldn't get up into the plane by myself. They had to help me up in there. So I landed with that thing over my head in water. And I couldn't get it off. So here I am like some kind of a fish jumping up to get a breath of air and then go back down. And I'm a non-swimmer. So this it was something of a problem. I did get it loose, and then I discovered that I'm in 7 feet of water here, and it's 18 inches deep here, and it's 18 inches deep here. I'm standing in a ditch. This is the area that the Germans had flooded.
I landed in an elm tree. The canopy of my chute drifted over an elm tree, and when I came down, my back hit the back of the hedgerow, which is always, it was a lot of brush. It's like backing into a cushion. My feet were touching the ground.
When we jumped in Normandy, I hung in a tree. And I couldn't see anybody, I couldn't see anything, but I thought after you're there for a while, your eyes kind of become used to it. You can see silhouettes and stuff like that. And I thought I saw a man. Pretty soon I heard a click, click. And I knew what he had. He had one of those smirk guns. They were, you know, you could shoot multiple shells. And when he done that, then I could see him move his arms, you know, and he was ready to shoot down at me. He didn't know I was there. He thought I was, because he see the plane, he could see the chute hanging in the tree. Boy, I reached down and got my knife, and I cut myself down and I rolled out. He did. Then he left. He thought he got me.
After we landed and we were so damn dispersed and away from where we belonged, I don't know where, I couldn't go to the map and tell you where I landed. All I can tell you is that I wasn't anywhere near 101st people. I don't even know where the people out of my plane landed in relation to me.
The scattered drops create so much confusion that they didn't know where our center of activities was or what we were doing. This was further compounded by dropping dummy parachutists. Now, I never saw a dummy parachutist, but I was told they were small bodies, not man-sized, maybe 3 feet tall, and they were dropped all along the west coast of the Cherbourg Peninsula. And that, too, added to the confusion of of who was where and what their actual mission was. But the Germans took a long time to recover and figure out where the attack was really coming from.
You don't know what's going on, you don't know where you are, you don't know where your friends are or who your friends are, and it's your first time that you've ever been in that kind of a situation, and so you're scared to death.
I rolled over on my back to start taking my parachute off, and here goes a string of tracers right over my head. They were probably 5 feet up, and then I hear something, and here comes some guy over, and they had issued us these little crickets as a sign and countersign. So if you cricked a cricket, that one crick meant it was the sign, and 2 cricks was the countersign. So I saw that somebody coming, I cricked, and I had to click, click. And I told the guy, you better get down. So he got down and he crawled away, and just about time he's crawling past me, that machine gunner opened up again. He says, thanks, pal, and off he went.
The first person I met turned out to be a member of the 101st Airborne. He had a cricket, you know, the metal thing that goes click, click. He was going, I was hearing this click, click all over the place, wondering what it was. And it turned out that this guy, so we had a password, so I give him a password he's supposed to answer to me, and he answered by click, click. And I didn't know anything about this click, click. It turned out to be a disaster there. Anyway, nobody was trigger happy, so he went on his way. He was disgusted. He wasn't the one I was looking for. He went away, click, click, click. And I went my own way trying to find the rest of the man I jumped with, and I eventually found them.
The officer that I connected up with was an 82nd Division person, and he sent me out to scout and this and that, just like anybody else, you know. I was out on a flank guard, myself and another man from the 82nd. His name was Murphy or Schultz or something like that. And all of a sudden, 40 feet in front of us, a machine gun opened up on the group of men. Now these men are going up a causeway that's got water over it. There's no place to go. Thankfully, we were able to get that machine gun before they did a whole lot of damage. But we got both of them with grenades before they even knew what was happening.
I heard some Germans, and they were coming into the field from the other end. And the only thing I could do was hide in the fence row, and this one German coming down on my side, I didn't think he could see me. I was kneeled down and behind some pretty thick stuff. But all at once he must have got an outline or something, and he whirled and shot right from the hip. The first shot missed me, but the second one got me right in the hip. And I couldn't even get up. I kind of rolled out of partly out of the hedgerow, and he come over to me, and Danny heard this going on, and he worked himself way back up the hedgerow, and this guy was going to finish me off, and Dan finished him, so I always gave Dan credit for saving my neck.
The squad would walk in the dark, and it goes one way. You meet a hedgerow, and you can't get through it. So you turn around, you follow it this way, that way. It seemed to me that they were going around in circles. And I remember in back of me were 2 medics, and the last one bringing up the tail was a corporal. And we were following this through the hedgerows, And at one point they stopped at a corner of the hedgerows, and they stopped. I looked around the corner of the hedgerows if they were still there, and come back to my position and waited. And after a while, I went around the corner. There was nobody there. They were gone. The rest of the squadron were gone. And the back of me was his two medics and the corporal. And so I talked with the corporal and decided that they didn't know what they were doing anyway. They were going on in circle in there with the hedgerows. There was no way to go straight. You couldn't get through a hedgerow. You just had to follow it until you found the way out. So we decided they didn't know where they were going. We wanted to go the other way. So I talked with the corporal. We decided to go our own way. The two medics didn't want to go with us. They left, and I never saw them again. I hope they find the rest of the platoon.
And here comes a German soldier with he had his burp gun hanging over his shoulder, his submachine gun. And I had my rifle in my hand, so I shot him. And then I shot him again, and then I threw up.
I made my way into St. Mary-Église, and everything was quiet there. I guess I was one of the first guys in there, except we had what we called pathfinders, and they went several hours ahead of our regular jump to okay the landing site for us as we came in. They had their little bleeper radios. But as I walked down the main street of one of the main streets of St. Mary-Église, which is a little village, there was a row of trees along the side, and practically every tree had a paratroop pathfinder hanging in it by his parachute. And they were all riddled with machine gun bullets and blood dripping on the sidewalk.
Our mission was really centered around St. Mary-Église. At that time, there were not a lot of roads. St. Mary-Église was a major road intersection of roads from the north, from Cherbourg, from the west, and from the south. Would be a major road hub for anybody counterattacking Utah Beach. So our role was to block all of the accesses to Utah Beach to give the beach landing forces protection until they could come up and join us.
As I walked up the street, another paratrooper came around the corner and met me. And we walked, I forget which way, but down one of the streets, and we came to another corner. He went around one way and I went around the other. And I hadn't gone 100 feet or so until I heard a shot, and I ran back and hollered. Down the street he had gone, there he was lying on the sidewalk with a bullet through his chest, and he was breathing his last. I looked around and I couldn't find anybody who might have done that, but down at the end of the street there was open tree area, so I imagine there was a sniper hidden in there. As I walked around the next corner, I saw one of our paratroopers sitting under the trees back in there, so I went back to see what was up. And he wasn't really sitting. The parachute was hanging on the tree, and he was in a sitting position. When I got close to him, he had a bullet hole right between his nose and his eye. Somebody had gone up and shot him with a pistol. And this was a little guy, he was about 18 years old, who had played football with me a couple of 3 weeks before in England. So it made me feel kind of sad about that.
I wouldn't go riding that glider for nothing. That was nothing but a death trap. The gliders were a good bunch of people, and they did a very fine job. We got jump pay, they didn't get jump pay.
They were airborne infantry. The main difference at that time, we had the same training, the same missions, the same goal. The main difference in our view is that they didn't get paid extra for it.
They trained pretty much like we did. And as I say, most of the gliders were ex-paratroopers. They were guys that, for some reason or other, didn't want to stay in the paratroops. So a lot of them went to the gliders because they wanted to be in a special troops. Even though they went in with those crazy plywood paper shells. And every one of them, very few of them land. They come in and they nose dive in. They hit something, then they just turn over. but most of the guys lived. Of course, the gliders come in later, you see. They don't come in with the paratroopers. Like in Normandy, the gliders didn't come in until morning. They came in after the invasion started.
The biggest reason for bringing troops in by glider was that you were guaranteed that this unit was going to get to ground in one piece, at least all in the same place. You can load the individual down with a couple hundred pounds, you can put half a ton in the glider, and up to and including small anti-tank guns and even small vehicles. And so the very earliest organization was something like 2 airborne regiments, 1 glider regiment, and later I think it was 3 in 1 or 4 in 1. Same process, the British had glider and parachute unit mixed, and the Germans had glider and parachute units mixed in the beginning. Soviets had pioneered the use back in the 30s because the glider allowed you to put heavy weapons, at least some heavy weapons, down with the airborne troops, and that's your biggest lack. The airborne troops basically are light infantry when they land.
There was 2 types of gliders. The American glider was called a CG-4A. It held 12 men, pilot and a co-pilot, and they were made of aluminum pipes and fabric. English gliders were huge gliders. They were like a size of a B-24, and they were made of paper and plywood. They were ugly looking things.
The British gliders were a little bit better because they were larger. They were built to break in two when they landed. They were intended to break in two. So when they landed, they broke apart. It gave egress from the two halves. The glider just broke apart, so there was no problem in people getting out of the glider.
We took off that morning. I was riding an English glider which had 29 people in it, pilot, co-pilot, and 2 carrier pigeons. We took off without incident. We went over the channel. We flew over the beaches at 900 feet at daylight, just breaking day. I'll never forget those 10 seconds that we flew over those beaches. Because I was standing behind the pilots. I wasn't belted in. And I was watching, well, just a few seconds going over the beaches, but I'll never forget it.
Well, it wasn't, it's not very far, 20 miles, 25, 30 miles maybe at the most where we went across. We released at the correct height, and what we hadn't noticed in the photographs was that the poplar trees that were surrounding the fields were there, but in the photograph we didn't see them. I'm to find out later that the Germans had gone in and cut all the limbs off, or had them cut off, so they wouldn't show up in high altitude aerial photographs. But they were take your wings off if you have. So you had to go over the top of those and still get to the ground and still get the thing stopped. Just before we hit the ground, the lieutenant in back of me hit me in the back. It's a nice landing, and he knocked my helmet up over my face. So I didn't get the glider straightened out. Now this all happened so fast, and I think this is about what it was. We hit the ground going a little bit sideways, maybe not 45 degrees, but enough to shear the landing gear off. Well, it turned out to be a good move, because all the glider did was make a ground loop, and it stopped real quick. It tore it up pretty well, so it was uneventful. Some of the fellows didn't have such good luck. They ran into the hedgerows, and some of them didn't come out very well.
The problem with the gliders in Normandy, of course, is that there isn't a lot of open land to land in. And there were huge casualties, accident casualties in the glider troops. And of course, the glider pilots were just about considered themselves expendable as soon as they cut loose, because their chance of surviving was, well, if you hit anything, the first thing that happened was the whole nose of the glider collapsed, and that went the pilot. And in the Normandy and the hedgerows and the woods and everything, you had to be very careful.
Our tow plane, which was a C-47, it was shot down. So we had to land, and we didn't land anywhere near where we were supposed to land. The area where we landed was hedgerow country, little bit of plots. Our glider landed, crash landed, went into a bunch of trees. I fell out. 29 people were killed. I was the only survivor.
Normally, we were told we would become ground soldiers when we got on the ground. Most of us thought, well, hey, we did our job. So we reported to headquarters, and they told us, yeah, we had done our job, and we were to get back to Utah Beach. And they were short of glider pilots. And I guess they used all of them on D-Day. So we were told to get back the best and quickest way we could.
We landed among German soldiers. They were as scared as we were, and tried to find an outfit. Most of the officers were killed. It was bedlam for a day or two till we got straightened around. And I think I've often told the people that I've talked to, I said the biggest problem we had, the Germans wanted to surrender, and we had to have a compound to take these German prisoners. There was rifles, grenades, anything you wanted to find on the ground, arms of any kind. We spent the hardest part of our time, the first few days, was disarming the French people. Because they would grab these rifles or whatever it was, and they would indiscriminately just shoot the Germans.
We missed a turn, probably. There's a lot of crossroads in that area. We saw a walled small city, and we started to go into the town, and a Frenchman had come out and he was waving his hands, and so we stopped, and he finally got across to us that the town had not been liberated yet. So we were probably lucky that I don't know this, but he said it was still occupied by the enemy. And had we gone into the town, we may have ended up in not too good a shape.
So we spent 30 days in Normandy, just as assault troops. The one day I can vividly remember, I was sitting in a small ditch with the battalion commander, a company commander, which is a captain, and a radio operator and myself. And we were watching the troops advance across this valley. And I got tired standing there, so I walked around the corner of the ditch, and I was maybe 10, 15 feet from them. An artillery shell came in and killed all three of them. I was the only one alive out of that mess. So then I had to go report back that our commander had been killed, our company commander had been killed, our radio, we didn't have any radio. And so it was a matter then of first sergeant, staff sergeant, tech sergeant taking over until we got officers. So I was lucky again. In fact, my middle name was Lucky, I think.
Their initial drops really are, despite all the problems they encounter, overwhelmingly successful. The 82nd and 101st, for all the confusion of their drops, I mean, the confusion of their drops probably add to their success. The Germans are unable to ever figure out exactly what's going on there until it's probably too late. The Airborne is able to capture the important choke points and secure the important exits from Utah Beach. So all of that goes real well. The Airborne is then reassembled, and although the original plan was to pull them out pretty quickly, they end up staying in Normandy for quite a bit longer. They had some still pretty strong units, and those were committed to the real grinding infantry fighting that was necessary to enlarge the beachhead.
The most amazing thing about, with all the incredibly detailed planning, that as far as I can tell, nobody had planned for the bocage.
Some of those hedgerows were solid dirt 6 or 8 feet high with brambles on top, and then they might have been 8 or 10 feet thick. So they were a formidable barrier. They were favorable for the Germans who knew the area and knew where all the roads were, and it was a great defensive location to be in. but for those of us to have to attack or move through the hedgerows, it was very difficult.
Nobody had talked to anybody that had actually been to Normandy, and Lord knows there were plenty of people in Britain that had been to Normandy, and asked about the terrain, that once we're off the beach, how are we going to be able to maneuver and advance, even though the planning was for a very slow advance? It's still, what are the peculiarities of this terrain? Because it is peculiar, it is unique. Nothing, until they ran into it. And then suddenly it was, oh my, this whole new tactical problem, which the American Army solved very quickly, but it was a bloody solution.
Hedgerow fighting was very difficult. It was an awful lot to ask a guy to say, okay, I want you to go and scout out this next hedgerow, because the chances of him coming back were very slim. Boy, when you encountered hedgerows, you knew darn well it wasn't going to move very fast.
Some Germans had made a little invasion into the area, and we went out to see what we could do with them. Eventually we came to a hedgerow, and we were fired upon from the hedgerow, so we turned the fire and dashed over to it. And there were some foxholes on this side of the hedgerow. Some Germans popped out of that, surrendered, and the others were on the other side of it. I remember one of the guys went down the hedgerow and stuck his gun through to look for something, and the German grabbed the gun and pulled it from his arms and shot him. And I remember also one of the privates asking the lieutenant, what should we do with these prisoners? And he said, take them over there and shoot them.
We started running from hedgerow to hedgerow. And one shot rang out, and the guy that was running with me, he took 1-2 steps, and then he fell. And I stopped to see if he was, if I could help him. And there was a hole in the helmet on this side, and it went through his head and bulged the helmet on this side.
So we were looking straight ahead, and up out of the middle of a hedgerow, right out of the hedgerow, like a pot blind a duck hunter would have, dug right down through the hedgerow. Here comes a German helmet. And he's looking diagonally to his left, and we were to his right. So he goes up with his Tommy gun. I go with my carbine. I wasn't shooting, but I hit John in the butt with it. But as I did, he blasted that Tommy gun and tore that poor guy's head to smithereens.
Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a gap in the hedgerow the Germans were running past on the other side. So I ran out in the middle of the field, and as they came through that gap, I started picking them off. That was my my second human being to kill, which I wouldn't ever brag about. But I don't know how many I had shot before some sniper got me, hit me right here, and I don't even remember being hit, but I do remember lying on my back and seeing the clouds go by, and I was just kind of in dreamland until the pain came.
They sent up tank dozers, and you've heard of the tank dozer, tank with a bulldozer blade on the front to break through the hedgerows. And we moved on out from there to the end of the hedgerow area. That was about the end of our action. We moved from there back to near Cherbourg and waited to be shipped back to England.
The U.S. divisions in Normandy, for the most part, did extremely well. The Airborne had an advantage in that they were picked troops. They were volunteer troops for the most part, and that gave them a somewhat higher quality of manpower. It made them a bit more aggressive. I think the infantry was more aggressive in the Airborne. You've got to be pretty aggressive to jump out of an airplane into enemy fires. You put those together, and you've kind of got a recipe for a combat edge that a lot of other infantry divisions didn't have.
We were trained, I think, more thoroughly than the regular troops were. Our uniforms were distinctive, and we had the elan that we were the best, and we were brainwashed, I think. I use the word brainwashed because we were led to believe, and we led everybody else to believe that we were better than anybody else. So it was a matter of brainwashing, I think. But I still believe I was better than anybody else.
I'm proud of the part I took. I am, but I wouldn't make it out as being unusually spectacular. I just did what everybody else in my unit did. We all did our job. We all did it right. We all did it well. And I think we were in a special unit. I think we were special troops. I think there's something special about a paratrooper group.
Even if the only thing the Airborne had ever done was the Normandy drop, they earned their keep for the whole war with the Normandy drop, because the Allies couldn't win the war without making a secure lodgment on the European continent in Northwest Europe. And the Airborne played an essential part of that invasion. And even if we just raised those divisions for no purpose other than making that one drop, they earned their keep, because at that point they became a strategic instrument, essential to the successful prosecution of the war. What more can you ask of a unit than that?
When you envision that on D-Day that 6,000 guys from the 101st and 6,000 from the 82nd came floating out of the sky in the middle of the night down on the Germans, you know, that was a tremendous event that'll never happen again. And combat and armaments have got so much more sophisticated that the day of a paratrooper is long gone.
On the 17th of September, the 101st Airborne dropped all around us that Sunday. First there was one plane, kind of low, you know, a big plane. What kind it was that we didn't know. The other guys, they were going to run. I told them not to run. They got a star instead of a cross. The German planes, they had a cross. And then pretty soon it was right over us, and the door went open and jumped out. That was nice. The sky was full of paratroopers. It was a beautiful day. Nice weather, no Germans in the neighborhood. And they jumped all around me. And that was the most beautiful sight I've ever seen.
The U.S. Army had trained almost entirely for mobile operations. The big Louisiana maneuvers, every divisional maneuver they'd done was for rapid mobile operations. Yet the planning for Normandy assumed essentially World War I trench warfare, a grinding attrition for 6 months or more, and that it would be 45 before they actually got near the German border. And it was a grinding attrition battle for less than a month. It then turned into a sudden breakout, which was exactly what the U.S. Army had trained for.
General Patton's Third Army dashes through France toward the Rhine. British armies slash through the heart of Belgium, outflanking thousands of Germans along the coast. With great event.
After the British were able to liberate Belgium so quickly, and in fact got a toehold into Holland, there was an air of euphoria about the fact that it seemed like the Germans were about ready to collapse, that all they needed to do was one more good push, one more good hit, and the German front would pretty much crumble and we would end the war before Christmas of 1944.
Everybody thought, well, yeah, they're going to collapse. We've got 500,000 prisoners in the bag. You know, the army has disappeared completely. And there was still the thought that it would be over by Christmas. And so in many ways, the battle turned out about as bad as it could for the German army. They were slowly attrited down until they couldn't hold a front, and then they were virtually overrun to the point where by the time they got back to Germany in the fall, the whole framework was gone because everything had been overrun.
Once the Allies break out from the Normandy beachhead, they begin this rapid, incredible advance across France. Now, the airborne operations are planned to assist this advance by seizing a bridgehead, taking a river crossing, maybe a critical town or Paris, for instance. But over and over again, This advance is so quick and so unexpected that the drop zones, the projected airborne sites, are overwhelmed or overcome before the airborne is able to get there. So these operations are canceled again and again, and this creates a lot of frustration on the part of the airborne soldiers.
We get briefed on the mission, which in that case was in France, and they were, each time they were scrubbed because Patton overran the jump zone. It was very disappointing to get all ready for something, and then it's kind of like getting a rug pulled out from underneath it.
Patton was moving so fast that there was no need of us going in, because he'd go through before we could get there, because he was in high gear. So that didn't make me unhappy at all. If he wanted to go do that, well, that's fine.
Just after they broke out of Normandy in France, they surrounded a bunch of Germans and they closed what they call the Falaise Gap. We were supposed to close that. Well, they didn't need us. So then we were called to a marching guard to jump outside Paris. They decided the army had moved fast enough they didn't need us. And the same thing, Flanders in Belgium. And they moved fast enough they didn't need us. We had been back in England not quite 2 months before we finally jumped in Holland at that Market Garden.
Market Garden is Montgomery's show. It's 21st Army Group's attempt to breach the Rhine quickly. Montgomery believes that if he can put a substantial force across the Rhine, north of the Siegfried Line, not only will he be free to move on the Ruhr, but he will have outflanked the Siegfried Line from the north. And it becomes a high priority mission for Montgomery.
Bernard Montgomery, the commander of the British and Canadian forces, was absolutely certain that this could happen, and he was encouraged because his British Guards Division and other units had been able to push forward very quickly, as fast if not faster than the Americans, and he was convinced that his front was where to make that final thrust.
As the euphoria of the race across France began to dissipate, it was a way of continuing the advance by making an end run around the west wall defenses along the Rhine, by crossing several rivers at once, by seizing the bridges of the airborne troops and then linking up with an armored force. And so essentially they had every major river assigned to an airborne division, 82nd, 101st, British 1st.
The most critical and difficult mission in Operation Market Garden is given to General Urquhart's 1st British Airborne Division. That's to drop on and seize the bridge at Arnhem, which crosses the lower Rhine. And this is the plum assignment. It's the thing that Operation Market Garden is designed to do: seize this one bridge, outflank the Siegfried Line, and get into Germany. It's the back door into the Reich. But it's the most difficult assignment because it's the farthest away from the attacking ground forces. It's the most difficult to link up with. It's at the very end of the airborne carpet. They are out there by themselves, isolated from the other units, isolated even from the other airborne units.
It was an attempt, an audacious attempt, to drive deep into the German lines and breach the Rhine River with one operation, and that operation consisted of a series of 3 division-sized airborne drops using 2 U.S. airborne divisions and 1 British airborne division, the 2 U.S. divisions being the 82nd and the 101st, that would seize strategic bridges along the major road into southern Holland, enabling the British 30th Corps, spearheaded by the Guards Armored Division, to drive up this highway. It's been called the Highway to the Reich, to drive up this highway, linking up in succession with each of these airborne pockets, and quickly get across the Rhine and get into Germany. In retrospect, the British said, one of the British commanders said, perhaps we tried to go a bridge too far.
In Normandy and Sicily and Italy, those were night jumps. And the next jump we made was in Holland, which was a daytime jump, and from that standpoint, much, much more successful because we knew where we were going and could see and so forth. Those night jumps, seems like everybody was lost.
They'd certainly learned a lesson from the night drop on Normandy, and that was that so many troops were scattered so badly, and that they had so many specific targets they had to hit in Market Garden and had to put troops on quickly, that it was more important for them to make sure that the pilots they had, who weren't real good at night flying anyway and night navigation, could actually find their targets and put the troops on them, than it was to get the security that comes from a night drop.
At that time of year, they were running into severe weather problems, and all airborne operations are predicated on the weather. And so you were really, your options were varied. If you try to drop at night, you may also be dropping at night in a storm. And they'd already tried a night drop at Normandy, and nobody wanted to experience that again. And I think that had a lot to do with it. Leaving logic aside, all the planners looked at the casualties and the scattering and the horrible confusion at Normandy. And even though there were some marvelous successes, nobody wanted to take the chance because they are planning an extremely tight operation with very, very specific targets. They're not trying to disrupt the entire German rear area as they were at Normandy, in which the scattering might actually work to your benefit. Instead, if the battalion is supposed to seize Bridge X, lands Y, the bridge doesn't get seized, it gets blown, the operation comes to a halt. So they were pretty much had to get the best weather and the best visual conditions possible, and that meant a daytime drop. That also meant taking the chance that you're going to run into much faster enemy opposition because they're not going to be as confused about where you are.
The Luftwaffe's aerial response to the drops is really quite minimal. I think no more than 15 or 20 transport planes were shot down in the entire course of the operation by German fighters. They do lose a number of aircraft to anti-aircraft fire. The German army in the sector is recovering, and flak does do some damage to the transports. But on the scale of Arnhem mistakes, I'm not sure the daylight drop is near the top of that list.
I never felt that anybody was concerned about jumping into Holland at the time. I really didn't. Maybe they would have later on, once they were in a plane and so forth, get a little more concerned, but getting ready to jump, or being in England, getting ready to go over there, as a matter of fact, I think that some of them were happy.
We loaded up, took off, and then started flying around in big circles. And they had so many planes, we circled around. I don't think we headed out in formation for it was at least an hour, maybe 2 hours. It was a long time, whatever it was. Because they had so many planes that they had to get them all in the air and then form them up. And by the time they got through, by the time the first guys were jumping in Holland, the planes were still, the other end of the line was still in England. It was that many planes.
We went into Holland, and that was the day jump, our first day jump, and I was a Pathfinder, and we went in and we jumped in about an hour before the main body. As we was going in, we came up through southern France. As we went across the line, our plane got hit, and there's a hole in the fuselage about the size of a Jeep, but none of our people got hit. But our plane was on its way down when it got to its DZ, its drop zone, where we were supposed to go between Grave and Nijmegen. And we jumped in at about 400 or 500 feet above the ground is all, and by the time our chute opened, we was on the ground, which that probably saved our life because the Germans were firing at us. Our plane went on, and we saw a big cloud of smoke, and it must have crashed over a little hill.
We flew from the same air base out of England that we did on D-Day, and the whole armada that took off and flew crossed over London on our way out to the Channel. Flew out over the Channel on a beautiful, beautiful Sunday day, and then swung up to the north, up the middle of the Channel, and we were heading to our drop zone, which was north of Zaan, Holland.
Nice sunny day. We were going in to jump, and McDonald, my assistant gunner, he pointed out the window, and I see these holes coming up through the wing of the plane. And about then we went out, and the engine was smoking. We went out. That plane went down. But all the crew bailed out. We saw the crewmen later, some of them, they said they all got out.
That flight over was about 20 minutes over land, and we had anti-aircraft flak all the way. You'd see a burst above you and then one below you, and 1 year elevation. You knew that you were getting zeroed in. But we didn't lose very many planes. But I was, in that jump, I think I was the most anxious to get out of the plane that I had been on any of them.
We were in formation, but we had fighters protecting us all the way. And you can see the fighters. You know, they were up high, then they'd swing down. You had one group that's high and another one is lower than that. So, you know, they're coming in. If they got ground targets, they can go in and strafe, and the other ones, you know, take care of fighters that come up.
In Holland, I was in the door. I stood in the door. I was the first one out of our plane. The general's plane was here. Then we were flying in V formation, and our plane over here. And I was the number one person out because I had that heavy pack on my leg, and I couldn't move up as fast as the rest of them. So when we got the signal to go, all I did was swing my leg out, and I was going.
It was a daytime jump, 12 o'clock noon on a Sunday, on a big open field. Huge open field. It was very, very quiet. There wasn't any shooting or anything.
We again had a perfect landing. I landed in a cabbage patch, very soft, deep, soft, well-tilled soil, a beautiful landing on a sunny day, just as people were coming out of church in Holland, and we got a royal reception.
There were no fighters. We didn't have any action, air action on the way. And we all kept in formation, and we dropped exactly where we were supposed to drop.
I think I'd rather jump than land in the glider, because everything is in somebody else's hand in a glider. If they get me where I can get to that door of a plane, I can jump. I'll take my chances on myself. That's what we were trained for. But when you're in with a group like that and all, your life is in somebody else's hands. When we went into Holland, it was flak. It seemed like from the time we hit Holland, right on in to our drop zone.
Our glider had no problem. We got the air and we took off our formation, and I was scared. The windows were all open, and as soon as we got over the channel, I got sick by fear. And so I had my head out of the window, and I was getting ready my breakfast and my dinner, and there was an officer, had never been in combat before, and he started laughing at me and making fun of me because I was sick. We got over Belgium, we flew over the lines in Belgium, and the Germans were shooting at us pretty heavy, and the bullets were coming up through the glider. Our pilot got hit. Not too bad, but he got hit pretty, so he was wounded. And I looked back, and this American officer, he had his head out of the window, and he was losing his breakfast and some dinner too, because he was scared too.
Coming into Holland, of course, we going in the corridor over Holland, we ran into intense anti-aircraft fire, but the tow pilots were briefed to go in as low as possible, so we went in at treetop level, and this was a great advantage to the tow planes and the glider as well, because we could see the enemy down there, and they couldn't move their guns and artillery fast enough to keep track of us. So it was to our advantage, but it was kind of scary to. Several times I noticed that the red flash of tracer bullets between the tow plane and the glider, and you realize that there was five shells in between those.
Anti-aircraft fire is probably more dangerous to gliders than it was just about anything else in the sky. And anywhere there was heavy anti-aircraft opposition, the gliders took some extremely heavy casualties. In addition to the fact that even under best conditions, you're making a controlled crash. And in the areas they consistently dropped gliders or paratroops is not wide open plains. Holland is notoriously heavily built up and fenced, and a fence and a glider don't mix very well. And unfortunately, when a glider has problems, it's not a question of losing one or two men, it's usually losing the entire glider and everybody aboard. More importantly, tactically, is the gliders carry, as I mentioned before, the heavy weapons. And you lose a glider, you're liable to lose your only anti-tank weapon, which can be a serious problem, or your communications equipment, or your heavy weapons you're relying on to save your lives in making an assault or holding a position, or worst of all, your ammunition supply for the operation.
You're in a hurry to get out, hurry to land that thing or something. We didn't have any chutes, so we were sure looking forward for that landing field to pop up. We lit in a great field. We hit. The pilot really did a good job. We lit right by a irrigation ditch. We couldn't wait to get out of that thing, and we all headed for that ditch. I don't think we were 15 feet from the ditch.
When we got out, we were under fire when we got out of the glider, so we hightailed as fast as we could to a railroad track which had a ditch alongside of it, jumped in it and stayed in there for, I don't know, 2 or 3 hours.
I landed in soft dirt in a sugar beet field, and we made a very, very sudden stop. The glider, the howitzer broke loose on one side, and the barrel flew out through the side of the glider, tore the whole side of it out. Nobody got hurt. And so the Germans were mortaring the field, so we were trying to get that howitzer out of the glider, and they kept zeroing in on us, and finally the sergeant who was in charge of the gun crew, he said to me, "Let's get the hell out of here."
The American Army, in theory, the glider pilots would be pulled out, evacuated as fast as possible because they were critical personnel. In practice, because an airborne operation, once you're on the ground, you're stuck there, they were pretty much on their own. And I know there were several instances where individuals joined regular units just because it was the safest place to be, and others in which they stayed by their down glider figuring that's where somebody would find them, and still others where they just sort of wandered around loose until they could find a way out.
A couple of us caught a ride on a Jeep. We were held up in this town of Grave, and maybe a mile out of town, we came upon a truck that the small arms fire was just exploding inside of it, so you didn't go around it. One of the troopers with his field glasses was looking down the road, the road was just straight for as far as you could see. And we'd gone over at the side of the road and taken a leak on the side of the road, and this guy hollered, "Look out." And we jumped in the ditch, and I don't know what else he said, probably there's fire coming or whatever. Apparently he had seen through his glasses, had seen this tank pull up on the road and swing his gun around, and he knew what was going to happen. Well, he missed, whatever. I think they were shooting at the three of us, because out in the field beyond that, the shell hit and exploded. And I'm sure he's not that bad a shot that because the next 3 shots hit the Jeep. It just boom, 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 and it blew up. So we made our way back to town. It wasn't very far. And we spent the night in town. The next day we heard word that they cleaned out the enemy in this town that the tank came from. We went through it before they had cleaned up the mess too. Oh, it was pretty bad.
The 82nd 101st both had, in the overall view, a similar task at Market Garden. They were to seize intermediate bridges to extend the salient up to Nijmegen.
General Taylor's 101st Airborne Division is given perhaps the easiest job in Operation Market Garden. They're jumping closest to the projected British link-up force on the ground, and they have to seize the bridges at Eindhoven, at Zaan, at St. Oederode, and Wegel. Altogether, they have about 15 miles of highway to seize and hold open so that the British link-up force can pass through and reach the 82nd Airborne.
Our division was the first one in, then the 82nd further in, the British clear up at Arnhem. But it was, when we landed, we just gathered up our gear, almost like we were in training. We knew where we were supposed to go, we went, we took the bridges. There were 4 bridges in this little town of Wegel. 2 railroad, 2 highway bridges we were supposed to take and control till the British moved their army up through there.
We were sent to Ivanhoven to take the bridge, and we took it. But it wasn't a very easy process.
We took Eindhoven on the 2nd day. It took us more than 1 day to get across the canal at Zaan because the Germans blew the bridge up and we had to ferry across in boats or whatever.
In the case of the 101st, the bridge essentially was blown in front of them, and they had to make an assault crossing of the river. And this is something that I don't think people, again, recognize one of the basic problems of airborne troops. They are trained as assault troops. They are equipped as light infantry. So when they make an assault of any kind, they're doing it without the tanks, the heavy weapons, the artillery support, or anything that's considered to be a prerequisite for making an assault. And yet it succeeded.
Then we took Eindhoven the next day, which was kind of, they show the pictures today, was like a parade. All these people just came flocking out of their houses.
It was an exciting time after the Airborne came down. Very exciting for us. We wanted to do as much as possible to help, but we wanted to share and we wanted to make them feel at home if we could.
The Dutch had very little love for the Germans by 1944. The Dutch resistance was very real, and given the size of the country, in fact, it was massive when you consider it on a per capita basis. German reprisals, while they had not reached the levels of barbarity shown in the East, had not been gentle. Right from the very beginning with the bombing of central Rotterdam and the other events took place in 1940. And so, and this is true both for the British and the American troops in Holland, that they were welcomed as liberators.
Within a few days, the German army had surrounded the town, and then we were on the defense again. And the Dutch underground was very active, and they kept our regimental commander informed of where the Germans were getting ready to attack. And my company being the reserve, mobile reserve, we would move at a run, not a fast run, but a double time run, across town, set up to meet the attack. And then we would move across the other side of town for the next attack. And we did that for several days. We took a fair amount of losses there.
Despite some heavy losses, General Taylor's 101st Airborne Division was able to accomplish the missions that were set forth for it in Operation Market Garden. They were fairly easily able to seize the bridges at Weigel and at St. Oderode. They lost the bridge at Zahn. It was blown up in the faces of the assaulting troops, but it was fairly easy to bridge that gap. Most critical target that they had was the bridge at Eindhoven, and although it took them till D+1, they were able to seize that bridge rapidly enough that it didn't slow down the British 30th Corps in its movement north towards Nijmegen and on to Arnhem.
If you look at what the 82nd is doing in their sector, they have several bridges that they have to take. Plus they have to take some high ground to guard against German reinforcements. The 82nd is a very, very complicated mission.
General Gavin's 82nd Airborne Division is given probably a little tougher mission, a little more complex mission than the 101st Airborne. They have to seize the high ground around the Groesbeck Heights. And they have to have that high ground because it dominates the area, and also because it's the most likely avenue for any German counterattack coming out of Germany. In addition to seizing and holding that high ground, the 82nd also has to take the bridge at Nijmegen and the bridge at Grave and the bridges on the canals between those two cities. So it's a very complex and difficult mission that the 82nd is being asked to do.
I made a beautiful, quiet landing in a nice open field. So I continued on through the field. I came to a road over there after a while. There were a few buildings on the side of the road. As I went around the end of the building, down the road, there was my old friend Louis Bendietta. There he was standing there, and he had a whole row of Germans against the building lined up under his gun. And I made a joke with him about taking good care of him and went on my way. I'd gone 2 or 3 more blocks, and I went around the corner, and here was my friend Sergeant Gillette coming toward me with the colonel. So that we were pretty well organized on that escapade.
As far as close-up contact those first few days, very little in our area. A few days later, we started getting a lot of artillery fire, and the crossroads that we had control over were continually under artillery fire. Of course, the Germans knew the area, they knew the important crossroads, and there were several crossroads that were continually being bombarded, and they were not fun places to go through.
I recall there was at night time. At 10 o'clock at night, the Germans started to shell us every night when we were in the woods. And it started promptly at 10 o'clock. You could set your watch by it. It lasted from 10 o'clock to 11:30. Every night we had that. Our objective was to take the bridge at Nijmegen and hold the bridge in one piece.
And they had a problem because the Germans were on the other side. They both had tanks and people there. And you couldn't really rush the bridge. You had no place to hide. And so if you tried to do that, you were going to get killed. So that became a problem of how they could do it. And they were trying to figure out a way, how do we do this? Can we cross the river? Can we cross the canal on the other side?
We went up to Nijmegen, and in Nijmegen, then that's when we were going to cross the river, the Wall River, which is the Lower Rhine. The British brought up these stupid boats, and there was about 10 of us to a boat, and 2 oars, and we had to, as we went out into the river, we had to use the butts of our rifles to get us across the river. And probably about 50% of the people got killed going across because the Krauts were over on the bank on the other side firing right down on us. And they were putting mortars and everything else on us, and 2 of the guys in my particular boat got killed going over.
Incredibly brave thing across a very, very wide river. The Wall, which is actually part of the Rhine, it's one of the parts of the delta essentially, is a very, very wide and swift-moving river, and to make that kind of assault, just amazes me to no end. I mean, incredible gallantry on the part of that division.
Of course, going across on those boats, we went down river quite a ways. We had to come back up to get up to the bridge. And so we came back up, and then on our way back up, one of our lieutenants, he stood up on the bank, he said, "Let's go." And as he said, "Let's," the machine guns just cut him right in half, so we didn't have him anymore. And so, but we went ahead and moved out anyway, and we went on up to the bridge, and we took the bridge then.
General Gavin's 82nd Airborne Division is also able to accomplish their missions in Operation Market Garden, although with more difficulty than the 101st. They're able to seize the Grossbeck Heights and hold them against heavy German counterattacks. They're able to take the bridge at Grave and the canal bridges. They lose one, but it's easy to bridge that gap. The most difficulty they have is in Nijmegen. And late the first day, they're able to seize the controls that would have destroyed the bridge, the controls that are linked to the explosives on the bridge. And that keeps the Germans from blowing that bridge up in the face of the assault forces. But heavy German resistance stalls the 82nd, and it's only after this gutsy cross-river assault against heavy resistance that the 82nd is able to take the Nijmegen Bridge and pass General Horrocks' 30 Corps through towards Arnhem to try to relieve the beleaguered British airborne forces there.
Their problem again was sustainability. And being able to continue to do that for any length of time was a real problem. The advantage, of course, was that they did get linked up with the British in fairly short order with British armored units. But you still suffer a lot of casualties when you don't have that heavy weapon support, and that's what you're going to land with. And their initial operations at Nijmegen and clearing the forest and holding open the road were done without heavy weapon support and without a lot of air support either. And again, over a short period of time, they would suffer a great many frontline infantry company, rifle company casualties because they had no other choice to do their job.
That road that goes up there along the Rhine River, they still over there referred to it as Hell's Highway. And it was because of so many, both German and Americans, that were killed on that route, opening up that route.
We were to hold the road open so these tanks and half-tracks and they were Limeys, they were English, they were supposed to go up to Arnhem. They were supposed to go up there, cross the river, and help those guys up there. They were getting killed. Every one of them was getting killed.
What the British armored forces are being asked to do is move an entire Army Corps down a two-lane highway. And the logistics of that kind of movement are incredibly complex. And then when you throw German resistance into the equation, it becomes a mind-boggling exercise, sometimes in futility. They're no longer able to maneuver, they're no longer able to do the things that they should be able to do. It becomes a battle of attrition with high casualties. Bottom line is that despite all these German efforts, the 82nd, 101st, and the British are able to hold this road open, and they're able to continue the movement towards Arnhem.
The 82nd Airborne and 101st Airborne did what they were supposed to do, and but by the time the delay that occurred, and by the time we started up that highway, German units were coming out from the Siegfried Line or wherever, and they're cutting us right in two, and then we'd have to get in a firefight for a day or two to clean it out and start up again north.
They talked a lot about American paratroopers. They hated American paratroopers, but they respected them. The Germans respected good soldiers, and they did not want to be up against American paratroopers.
We weren't at Nijmegen, we were near Nijmegen, and the German Panzer unit came through and cut us off, so we were off the highway. There were 5 British tanks. Started going through these trees, and I was between 2 of the tanks, and I forget whether they had all 5 of them or not, but anyway, there were several of them, and so right off the bat, as soon as this tree started going down, then whang, and 88 shell come flying right through, armor-piercing shell came flying right through this tank that was on my left, right through the turret. And the guys in the tank were burning up. A piece of the tank came flying off and hit me in the leg, but we helped get him out of there and out of this one tank, and he killed other. I mean, he knocked other tanks out besides the one, but he didn't even have to see them. All he had to do was see the trees that they were knocking down, and they fire right in there. About the time that the tanks were in a position that ones that were left could get the Tiger, why he just sauntered away and was gone.
I went up to a church steeple and was a forward observer there, and Germans were coming in, and I could see them coming in, and I was trying to get the battery to give me fire, adjust fire, because they gave me coordinates. They didn't hear me. They couldn't hear me, they said. And all I got over we can't hear you, Minnie. I said, that was my nickname. They can't hear me. And so by the time that I finally took the radio operator and I said, go, get out of here. Go down there and try to get them and tell them I want artillery fire on these coordinates. And you stay down there. Well, by the time that all happened, we were overrun by the Germans. And the only reason I got out of that church is the 504 come in and rescued me.
My buddy and I, my ammunition bearer buddy of mine, we come under some pretty heavy artillery fire crossing a field, so we dove into a ditch, and a shell exploded between us. It knocked me down, and he got the shrapnel. He hollered over and said, "Hey, Hash," he said, "are you hit?" And I said, "I don't think so." He said, "Well, I am because I'm bleeding." I went over there, and he was. He had shrapnel in his chest and neck and face, and so I stopped as much blood as I could on him and used both of our first aid kits, gave him a couple of shots of morphine so he wouldn't go into shock, and I packed him back across that field. And he said we were still under fire, but I don't even remember that because, you know, you've got a mission to do, and that's to get him back to the aid station. So I got him back to the aid station and left him. Figured he would be dead before morning because he was completely white, passed out at that time. So I left him there for dead. Now, for the first time, I was wanting to get Germans. He had killed my best buddy, and so I went off down this road. I saw some Germans, looked like a squad of maybe, hard to tell, 8, 10 of them. Lay down behind a tree and waited till they got up to where I could hear them talking, and then they opened up with them and found out I got into more than I really wanted. One of them raked me across the shoulder, put 5 bullet holes in my jacket and a 6th one through my arm. An uncommissioned officer called out, "Rouse mit the hands loafing." I didn't know what it meant, but I had an idea what it meant too. I know what it means now. It means come out with your hands up. And there was nothing else I could do, and so I stood up, and when I stood up, I knew that I was a dead man. I knew, you know, just flashed in my mind. I knew they were going to kill me. And so don't ask me, except they wanted me for information. That's the only thing I could figure.
Another fellow in our section, whose name was Benny Simanowitz, he said, "I can get a prisoner." So with the support of a few bottles of schnapps to get him prepared, well, he went out in broad daylight, went right through a minefield, went out, went into a dugout where the Germans were dug in, picked up 2 German prisoners, brought them home, and he hadn't been home 15 minutes before General Gavin and others were down to pin a silver star on him. They had been so anxious to get prisoners. He went out all by himself, brought 2 of them back. After the war, he became the subject of one of the 82nd Airborne's recruiting posters of what an airborne soldier does.
We were 73 days on the front line without a let-up in Holland. We weren't designed, we didn't have the ammunition, we didn't have the guns, we didn't have anything to really do the job, to confront for a long period of time.
The length of time that the Airborne spent on the ground after Market Garden was one of the longest periods they spent on the ground in the entire war, because they could not get them relieved. They had a mechanized corps. The units were all trying to funnel forward over a very narrow front. They were still hoping to turn the salient into something important. In fact, they never did. And so they left the airborne troops in place for lack of anybody to replace them with rapidly.
I visited the little town of Driel, where the Polish paratroopers had landed. And they landed right on top of the little town of Driel, right on top of a German bivouac. So they were immediately in combat. And they had a very rough time. And I visited there and was talking to one lady who, her father was a doctor and she had been a nurse at Driel at the time. And I talked to her about this, and I said, didn't you ever feel badly that these guys would land right on your town, kill your cows, burn your houses, kill civilians, when 4 miles away a little town was untouched? And she looked me right in the eye and she said, not a bit. We're proud to have them land here. He said, you guys fought hard and you were brave and you helped us out, but you didn't have to live under those SOBs for 4 years.
Most of the Dutch people, they are very, very thankful. If it hadn't been for those paratroopers, I might not be here. And that's something to remember.
That Market Garden expedition was probably one of the biggest failures of the war. Right? Frankly, and I hate to say that because we were a part of it, and a lot of good men killed as a result of that. But it didn't work out. Our British backup, second British, didn't get to us. They were supposed to get to us within 48 hours, and they were closer to 5 days.
Tactically, all of them did a great job, and the 101st, 504 in our division did exactly what they were expected to do, and we were very proud of the Holland operation, although history records the whole thing as a bad plan and a disaster.
As far as Operation Market Garden goes, one of the many criticisms of the plan, and there are many criticisms of the plan, the biggest one is that it completely ignored Clausewitzian friction. There were too many things that had to go right. It was an enormously complex plan. All the pieces had to go together. And of course, a few of them did not go according to plan, and that eventually caused the entire operation to unravel.
Well, Market Garden is made very spur of the moment. When you look at Market Garden and attempt to analyze the failures, that's the first thing that comes to me immediately, is it was planned on the fly, essentially off the cuff. When you compare it to something like Normandy, which was months, if not years, in the making, it's not surprising that certain things were left out of the plan. I think one of the biggest mistakes that is made in this campaign is essentially stopping the front for over a week before they actually launch this offensive. If the Germans really were in sort of pell-mell retreat, you want to be like Napoleon and just not give them a break. You want to pursue them. You don't want to sort of stop and then start again against entrenched positions.
The British Airborne at Arnhem, the operation had been planned by somebody who was not an airborne person. He had them jump and land 9 miles from their mission. So after they landed, they had 9 miles to travel on foot, carrying their equipment and their wounded, and their injured, which we would never have done. So they had a bad planning deal from the start. They did a masterful job of, in Arnhem, defending it as long as they could, but being light infantry again, they just couldn't stand the German onslaught. The British lost about 3/4 of their men at Arnhem.
British planners thought that the anti-aircraft concentration at the bridge at Arnhem would be too heavy. And so the division was dropped actually a couple miles away from Arnhem, and it was dropped there, and then it would assemble there and move and take its objective. Unfortunately, what that meant was that the division right away would be fighting in two directions, that it would have one element of the division that would have to defend its original drop zone where the glider reinforcements would be coming in and its supplies would be dumped, while another element of the division had to go capture the bridge, which was the principal objective.
Unfortunately for the Allies, as their famous book and movie say, it was one bridge too far. The Americans seized their objectives quite successfully and enabled the Allied column to drive up the road to Arnhem, the final bridge location. But at that location, the British first paras were not only stopped, but almost virtually eliminated by the German defense because there were units there they had not expected, and when they saw that there might be improved defenses there, Montgomery chose to ignore that rather than cancel the operation, and it ended up being a disaster for the British paratroops.
The Airborne Division is the most mobile asset at the commander's disposal before they're used. But once the airborne troops hit the ground, they are the least mobile element on the battlefield, and they essentially become a hostage. Because when an airborne division lands behind the enemy lines, the enemy knows beyond a shadow of a doubt where the ground attack is coming. There has to be a link-up. So once that airborne division hits the ground, the picture is immediately clarified for the defender. And Operation Market Garden, the drop at Arnhem, demonstrated this with brutal clarity.
The British armor that was coming up the corridor that we had captured for them were very slow and got a lot of criticism and a lot of comments about their stopping for tea along the way.
These guys would just stop and have their tea. It didn't matter, it seemed, whether the world kept or not. They just had to have their tea at that time. And we could never understand that, because if there's fighting to be done, we figured that's what we should be doing.
When it come time for tea, they'd stop right in the middle of the road and make tea. And then the Germans were just shooting the hell out of them, but there they'd make their tea.
The stories still circulate, and they found their way into popular history and movies and other accounts of the British stop for tea while people are dying up front, and American troops being just incensed at what appeared to be the lackadaisical attitude. In fact, the troops that stopped for tea stopped because they didn't have anything else to do. You had a corps-sized column going up one road. The only people who are doing any fighting are the ones right up the front of the column. Everybody else is waiting for them to get out of the way so that they can move. Any experienced soldier, when he's got nothing better to do, is going to relax because he may not get a chance to relax in the near future or ever. And when the American 82nd that had just been relieved and had been fighting, and they look over there, and there's a tank crew brewing up tea. Why aren't you guys doing something? Well, what are they going to do? Shoot at Americans? They're the only ones around. But it's, again, it's an emotional reaction by people who are in combat. They're not reacting logically. On the other hand, the Guards were fairly experienced troops, and they recognize that except for the lead Sherman and a few people behind him, the rest of us haven't got a target.
The British run into much more resistance along the front than what they expected. Then, once they're finally through that, they get to the 101st sector where the bridge has been blown, and they have to take several days to get that fixed. It takes them a while to get the bridging equipment up because of the logistical log jams. Clearly, attacking along one road has a lot of problems, and I'm not so sure any division could have overcome them. Once they get across the bridge, they make pretty rapid time, and they, get up to the 82nd sector in no time at all. But once they get across the bridge at Nijmegen, again with the help of the 82nd, they are stymied by the SS Panzers who are blocking their way. The territory between Nijmegen and Arnhem is probably the worst on the whole battlefield. It's very, very marshy, and getting off the road there was akin to just getting bogged down completely. So, at that point they're stuck, they're stymied. My overall comment about the Guards is, yeah, they make some mistakes. Yeah, they stop for tea on occasion, but, let's face it, most outfits will stop for something along the way.
We felt it could have been done a lot better, but it was all under the control of Montgomery. It was a British operation, and that was one of the two experiences that we had with Montgomery that really soured us on him.
Market Garden is also odd in the sense that it's the one case in the war where Montgomery takes an enormous risk. A commander who normally was always rather cautious. Why this was done, again, it's spur of the moment. I don't think it's well thought through. If they had blown the main bridge at Nijmegen or the main bridge at Arnhem, the whole operation would go down the tubes. That, to me, makes the whole operation very questionable from the start. There are a lot of things about Market Garden that are very questionable. Why do this operation? Why launch this one thrust, supposedly, to get across the Rhine? Even if you make it, would not the Germans be able to seal that one bridgehead? And if you're going to launch it, why launch it there? Why launch it essentially in the Rhine Delta? I mean, that's what Holland is. I mean, if you're going to cross the Rhine, there are better places to do it. Market Garden's a series of mistakes, one after the other, but the fundamental problem with it is just a bad design to begin with. An operation that I think should never have been sent in.
One of the big meetings was this guy come in there, and he was dressed up fit to kill, and he had these boots that shined, blinded you from 100 yards, and blouse, pants, and God, he was a neat looking guy, and he was asking for volunteers for the paratroops, Airborne. I turned to my buddy. He was in the same shape I was in as far as trying to get into the pre-flight. And we says, well, my gosh, that's about as close as we can get to the Air Force. Let's join up in the paratroops.
Well, this partner of mine talked me into it. I hadn't even thought about it or heard of it, really. To begin with, I would have put in for Air Cadet, but I didn't have 20/20 eyes. And anyway, Duke says, well, we'll get $50 extra, and I know that sounds pretty good to me. So off we went, and I never regretted it.
Towards the end of the training, they came around and asked anybody want to join the paratroops. And it turned out that 3 of us out of approximately 60 men join the paratroops.
We signed a little piece of paper saying that we would jump out of an airplane. Now there was 500 guys in this room, and there was 2 of us when they asked for volunteers. There was 2 of us that couldn't wait to stand up, and there was 498 guys looked at us like we were the dumbest hunk of humans that ever lived.
It was pretty easy to get in the Airborne. They were really looking for people at that time. We had to pass a physical examination, which included an eye test too, one color vision, and a few things like that.
Finished my basic, go back and started my jump training, and they gave me an examination, found out I was colorblind, and they washed me out. Got buddying around with a couple of fellows that worked up in the hospital, and one of, was always griping about the fact that I wanted to be a paratrooper. He said, no problem, go volunteer again. They're crying for volunteers. So I did. They told me when to come up there, and the sergeant that was giving me the examination, he told me what day to come and all of that, and he picked up a little green ball of yarn. He said, what color is this green ball of yarn? I said, that's green. He said, that's right. Picked up another ball of yarn. He said, what color is this red ball of yarn? I said, that's right.
I was 18 at the time. It was something different, and a way of getting out of the regular infantry, which was rather dull and not much, walking too much everywhere all the time.
And most of us wanted to do something different, and to try to explain now how we walked up and volunteered for the paratroops is kind of difficult. We had seen pictures of it. We had understood that they would have a different role, and that sounded more appealing than some of the other things that we could see on the horizon. So exactly why we signed up for that, I don't know. $50 and the fact that they had uniforms that we were told that the girls liked.
If you joined the paratroops, you were definitely joining a combat outfit. And that is your chance of avoiding combat once you're in the paratroops was very slim indeed, And in that sense, it was, I think, an elite group. At least they told us we were elite all the time. And that has a lot to do with it, too.
Because the recognition that you are going to be jumping someplace to assault something without any of the tools that you expect and have expected since World War I. You've got to make up for it with a sheer, blind, dumb belief in your own superiority. And there's a tremendous emphasis on the special nature of an airborne soldier.
We were brainwashed, no question about it. When you look back, we were brainwashed. We were the toughest guys that ever lived. You never could really appreciate that until after you'd gone through it and seen how much it benefited you at the time that you needed it. So we had very rigorous training.
Airborne troops in the U.S. Army run everywhere. They are trained to run everywhere. The training starts with running and physical conditioning. There is a very logical reason for that. Once you have landed and unhooked yourself from your parachute, the airborne soldier is the least mobile infantryman in the U.S. Army. He has got no vehicles. So the only way he's going to get anywhere is to walk or run. And the only way he's going to get anywhere with his weapons, his ammunition, his food, everything it takes to sustain himself is to carry it on his back.
Our training was tough. Every place you went, you ran. You never could walk. As soon as you hit the door of the barracks, you ran. If you went to the movie, you ran. If you went to the PX, you ran. And you wouldn't ever want to get caught not running.
Here you got a bunch of people telling you exactly what to do, when to do it, and if you look cross-eyed at the sergeant, give me 50, and you're down doing 50. And when you get up and you say, well, is that enough? He said, no, give me another 50.
The other emphasis was on doing push-ups constantly, and that's because the shock of that parachute opening, because the design of the harness is taken up almost entirely by the shoulders and back. And the pull-up or the push-up are the best ways to strengthen those muscles.
Every time you turn around, you had to do 50 push-ups or something like that. I could do 50 in either hand, really, either hand. When I talk about Army training, Ours was almost, it must have been 80% physical or more.
The jump training was 4 weeks of learning to pack chutes, practicing on the aerial tramways, landing in sawdust pits, how to land when you came down, how to handle the chute, how to control it in the air.
Then we had the jump where you jumped out of a door 30 feet above the ground on the cable, and you jumped and you were hooked to this cable, and when you jumped out of the door, you dropped the length of your static line, and then you kind of bounced along on that cable. I thought that was fun.
A wooden tower, and the platform up top is 34 foot high, and there was just a ladder built perfectly vertical on the side of this thing with no railing, no covers, nothing, just climb up there. And we had several guys that got up there about 6 or 8 steps on that ladder and froze. And of course, those kind of, anything like that happened all the way through jump school. You didn't even see the guy that night. He was out of the barracks. He was gone.
During Tower Week of airborne training, these guys are put through a series of increasingly higher towers. And really, that's done for a couple of reasons. One is to give them the experience of jumping out of heights, and secondly is to increase their confidence in their ability to actually go out the door. And so you start with like a 30-foot tower, and they jump out and they get the shock of landing on the ground with the risers and everything simulated from them. And eventually you work up to a 200-foot tower where they actually free fall with a parachute and do a parachute landing. And so the towers become an integral and an important part of preparing the men to actually jump out of the airplane.
Fourth week, we packed our own chute and then went and jumped it. Packed a chute and jumped once a day for 5 days, and that was the culmination of the airborne training.
So some of the guys spent all night packing their chute. They'd pack it, run pack it, and then repack it. So that didn't bother me. I just went ahead and packed mine and went back over to the barracks and went to bed.
Our experience in packing chute, the first time you packed the chute, you took the full 4 hours to do it. The second time you took 3 hours, and the third time 2 hours, and by the last chute packing, people threw their chutes together.
The worst part was sitting and waiting on Lawson Field in what they call the sweat shed. And there's a bunch of benches in here, all these guys in your class waiting to go jump, and that's where the nerves set in. But as soon as we got loaded in the plane, I think it was fine.
This outfit ahead of us was jumping their night jump. So when they went up, their plane, they had about 22 people on it, and to jump. And paratroopers was making their last jump, which is night jump, and the plane went down, and it crashed and killed everybody on the plane. So the next morning when we got up to go up to jump our first jump, I didn't have too many people left. And I think maybe out of the 180 people or so, I had maybe 50 left.
The first jump, standing in the doorway there, I was asking myself, what in the world are you doing up here? Because I wasn't very thrilled about it. Right then is when a lot of the fellows began to sweat. I mean, they were sweating because we had to pack our own chutes. And if you didn't tie a square knot in the apex of your chute, it would just slip out. A granny knot would let it slip out, and it wouldn't pull your chute open. And that's when it really hits you.
You get a little problem with the first jump. You know, you're looking forward to it. You know, you're ready to be a jumper. But when they put you in that plane, they take you up, and somebody says, stand in the door, and you're looking down there, and you say, do I really want to do this? You don't have time to answer yourself because you're going out the door. But once you're in the air, you drop maybe about, I'd say roughly about 70 or 80 feet before your chute opens. So there's a period in there that you say, is it going to work or isn't it going to work? But once it opens, then it's a hell of a joyride. It's fantastic.
We got up there, and of course we were singing and raising the dickens in the plane and all of that. And all at once they said, stand up and hook up. So you stood up and you hooked up, and before you knew it, you're out. And I'll say this, don't get me wrong, I was scared every time I jumped. But once you're out there, the most exhilarating feeling that you've ever had.
When I hit the ground on my first jump, I would have given anything in the world to immediately get in another plane, go up and do it again.
I cannot say I was afraid. I think it was a curiosity as much as anything. We had done the mock-up jumps and all, you know, out of those mock-up towers. And in a way, it wasn't a whole lot different to me. The difference was that when you went out the door, that prop blast got a hold of your parachute, and the first thing you know, you snapped your neck. When the chute opened, it was pop, you know.
There's no sensation of falling. You get a lot of wind. When you're in the air, the main sensation is you go out the door and the chute is jerked open, and the shock is pretty traumatic. If you're in the wrong position, the shock on your shoulders is a pretty hefty jerk. After that, the ride down is great.
When I went out of that plane, I didn't have a good, my form was bad. I saw my parachute open between my feet, which you're not supposed to do, and it just snapped the hell out of me. And my risers got all tangled up, and I couldn't get my head up to see my parachute. So I just floated on down and hit the ground, and you hit hard as hell. Those old 28-foot parachutes, really, they brought you down pretty fast. You hit hard.
Now, the other thing that you've got to worry about is coming in for a landing. Because if you stiffen up coming up from a landing, you're going to hurt yourself. And it's pretty obvious. If you're coming down and you put your feet down and you hit hard, you're either going to snap your ankle or snap your knee.
Normally I let on my heels, my rear end, and my helmet hit the ground. The first 2 times I jumped in training, I was knocked out. And I came to with this big husky jump master lifting on my belt, got me to breathe.
Instructors always told you we've never had a complete malfunction in this jump school. What I found out later, what they called a complete malfunction was the chute was never pulled out of the pack. And there were guys that had streamers and they had to use a second chute. I never did. So.
The biggest thing was you count 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, and if your parachute isn't open, you're in trouble. So you wore in front, you wore a reserve parachute, and if 3 seconds your chute wasn't open, you pulled that reserve. Otherwise, you're gonna bounce off the ground.
The first few jumps, I don't think, in fact, I'm not sure I ever did it. It's like counting. You're supposed to count 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. And every time I counted, well, I said 3,000 when my feet hit the ground. So I kind of gave it up. If your chute don't open, counting ain't going to make a lot of difference.
We were slipping because we were close to the river. We were slipping to be sure we were over land. And by that, you just pull on your risers to dump air on one side, and that's the only maneuverability that we had. On this one, I was slipping, and when I hit that crosswind, it swung me up, oscillated me, and I come down on my spare chutes and broke 2 ribs and kicked my knee out of joint, and so I spent a few days in the hospital. But it was the nice thing about it. It was a night jump, and it was my final jump, so I was already qualified.
Certainly, by the time you get through jump school, it was a great experience. And that's one of my better days was the day they pin your jump wings on.
The total number of people that had a realistic idea of what they were getting into was very small. But frankly, that's true of a lot of military volunteering. Frederick the Great put it very neatly, a rational army would run away. So you don't want rational, you want people that are enthusiastic. And whether they knew or not, by the time they were finished with airborne training, they had a very good idea of what they were getting into. But they also by that time knew they were going to be doing something special. They were going to be not just another cog in a huge wheel. They were going to be a special cog in a special organization with very special things to do.
It was just like any other jump as far as getting in the plane was concerned. I happened to be assigned to the plane of Colonel Gavin, who was the regimental commander. We had a lot of confidence because Gavin had gone a few days before in the tail gunner position in a bomber and flown over Sicily. So he had seen the area and seen where we were going from riding in a bomber. So we thought, well, we should be in pretty good straits.
The mission in the Sicily landing for the 82nd was a reinforcement of a beachhead operation to enhance the ability to seize beachhead, move inland, get yourself a fair lodgment. The problems with it, again, were a ground force that was too used to aircraft being opponents and shooting at them, a approach that took it right over the invasion fleet instead of parallel to the beach, and thus guaranteeing any scattering was either going to be into the water or into Sicily itself, neither one of which were desirable.
My understanding, when they jumped into Sicily, that they missed their drop zones from one place that they were supposed to be dropping. They missed our drop zones by more than 10 miles.
I don't think I ever realized that we were lost. I was only third person behind Gavin, and he never gave the impression that of being upset or being lost. But we did. We were quite a ways from our target in Sicily, and so when we went out the door, I had no concern but what we were going to be where we were supposed to be. It was pretty obvious quickly that we weren't.
We were supposed to parachute in the south central part of Sicily, but when the pilot came under fire, he flew down at treetop level and zigzagged up to the northeast end, and he was going, I forget how fast they went, 115 miles or so. Supposed to slow down to 90 for the jump, but he gave us a jump signal at full speed at low elevation, and we bailed out. And I made about 2 vicious swings and hit a tree with my back, and I was paralyzed for about 2 hours.
The drop in Sicily is one of the great snafus, exacerbated by friendly fire. There was a very regrettable friendly fire incident involving the Navy opening fire on the troop transports, and many of the pilots essentially jettisoned their paratroopers over the water. It was a disaster.
We didn't know about it immediately, but we heard about it in bits and pieces afterwards. And about 23 planes and 230 some people were lost when our own Navy shot them down.
I think there were about 16 or 18 or 20 people on each airplane, and I don't think any of them lived through that barrage. I remember being on the shore of Sicily and saw something floating out in the ocean the next day or two, and I waded out and pulled it in. It was a paratrooper, 504, with his parachute still on, unopened, but quite dead, of course.
Our first major combat as a regiment was at a place called Piazza Ridge. A number of our fellows got into a pretty good little firefight there.
Tanks came at us on this, what they call Piazza Ridge. We saw them shoot at single men at a time. I seen that gun pivot toward me, and I just threw the gun toward the edge of the hole, and I dove in it. And that 88 hit a tree right behind me, and the concussion of that thing going off sucked me right out of that slit trench.
They ran into a German tank, which they always called it a Tiger tank, and I'm not sure that it was. The Tiger, there were not a lot of Tiger tanks built, and that was the largest German tank. And I'm not sure it was a Tiger tank, but they always claimed the credit for stopping a Tiger tank at Beaza Ridge.
Finally, we got a liaison man from the Navy, and we got better protection from the big stuff. I think they knocked out every big tank that was on that side of the island.
Our experience in Sicily with the Germans was, it was very bad where we ran into them. We lost the leaders of one battalion who happened to land at the right spot, which was a very well fortified spot by Germans, and they had a very rough time. But for the rest of the regiment, there was not a lot of contact with the Germans.
We fought on up to Palermo, which they didn't hold us up much. And there we met up with the British that had come the other way. All at once we got the order to have everything packed up and ready to go in 7 hours. We had to jump in Salerno.
We were called to go into Salerno when the beach landing forces were having trouble on the beaches and they needed reinforcements fast. So we were called in. We actually did not jump behind German lines, but we jumped in a plain area that was under artillery fire by the Germans.
The problem with Salerno is that it's just surrounded by high ground. The Germans got an awful lot of stuff there awfully quickly and really gave the beachhead a hard time. The paratroopers are not dropped in to conduct a combat mission. The airdrop is used simply to insert them. They can only bring so many people in across the beach so fast, and just to get airborne troops into the perimeter, they're airdropped just to get the bodies in there quicker. So that's kind of an unusual airdrop, and it's the use of the parachutes just to get people forward deployed.
And it really wasn't part of expanding the beachhead at all. It was part of saving the beachhead. And then it was a thing where some people went in by parachute, some went in by glider, some went in on boat. And you end up doing essentially a defensive operation against enemy armor, something that is the last thing airborne troops are equipped for. But you do it because there's nobody else to do it.
We jumped right in the middle of it, just above where they were fighting on the beach, but right between the artillery and the tanks. That was a hellhole for about 20 hours.
Well, Salerno was, we were pushed back against the hills, mainly to provide additional protection for because people and supplies were still coming in on the beaches, and then moved somewhat inland, but did not run into a whole lot of resistance. By then, the Germans were, other than their artillery that they could reach us with, were starting to move northward. They knew where the best defensive lines were, and they were moving out.
The purpose of the Anzio beachhead was to get behind the German main defense line in Italy and cut straight to Rome and seize it before the Germans could reinforce it or pull back from their other position, hopefully even cut off the German army that was further down the boot of Italy.
We got on a large English ship, and it had these rope ladders going down on it. And when we got to Anzio, at about 2 o'clock in the morning, where we started to load into these small landing barges climbing down the side of the ship. And then we went into Anzio. We went in first with the Rangers. There were several battalions of Rangers there, and then the 509 made the initial landings. The 504 came in, I think, later in the afternoon.
Our ship that went in was hit by a German bomb that came over because the German bomber came in from the sun side, and so you couldn't see the bomber come in because the sun was blinding you, and the day happened to be a sunny day. And so they hit our ship with a bomb. Several of our people got killed. We was out about 100 yards, and we had to swim to shore.
Again, at Anzio, putting airborne troops in as regular infantry by landing craft. It's an act of desperation, same thing at Salerno. You are now using them to reinforce a defensive operation, say the beachhead. Well, these are your premier assault troops. This is, in fact, is exact parallel to the constant comment by German veterans that you do not use a panzer division on defense. Well, you do if you're desperate. If you're using your assault troops in defense, you are desperate.
We got into several miles inland before very much resistance occurred, and then within probably 3 days, we were surrounded by about 10 German divisions.
Anzio became pretty much a shooting gallery of the Americans sitting there under artillery fire and night patrolling and not enough strength to move ahead.
Yeah, it was really bad, and they had all the high ground. You couldn't stick your head out of a foxhole. The people were on the forward slopes of those hills that we were on. They had to even use a periscope to look out there and observe.
The weather was so bad, it rained all the time, it was cold, and the mud over there was like slop, and it was about, maybe about a foot deep or a foot and a half deep. And underneath was like glass. It was like it was ice down underneath. And that's what we had to live in all the time. And we had to live in our foxholes because during the daytime, you couldn't get out because the Germans would spot you and they'd throw their rounds in at you. So you had to eat, sleep, and crap in your helmet in the foxhole.
And I was wounded at that time in the chest and the arm and the head. So I was evacuated. It was probably a pretty lucky thing because that was a really terrible thing to be. And my platoon leader and my company commander were killed on the same day. They just got direct shots, direct hits by the mortars or artillery right in their foxholes.
I think it was a mistake to go on Anzio. We did not accomplish anything, not a thing.
That didn't work out as planned, unfortunately, because the German defenses there were much tougher, and they ended up being able to counterattack very quickly. And in fact, the Anzio beachhead was in danger of being eliminated at several times.
You have, first of all, an apparent confusion in what is our purpose, in that the fellow on the spot says, essentially, all we got to do is get ashore and dig in, while somebody else is saying you get ashore and you head for Rome, while the forces that get ashore don't have the mobility to go for Rome, while the beachhead you are trying to consolidate is tactically horrible in that it is overlooked on all sides by the high ground. It does not cut any communications with the south, but it was a handy beach and it was near Rome.
The 509 stayed at the Anzio beachhead for 74 days. So I've always kind of considered it was a lucky wound to get me out of that hellhole. But then we got ready for the southern French invasion. And so on about the 10th of August, we went to the airfield and started to load up, and we stayed there in pup tents until we made the drop into southern France.
The overall operation in southern France appeared to have a strategic purpose when in fact the purpose was more geopolitical. There are a lot of troops in the Mediterranean. One part of the coalition wants to keep them there, the other part of the coalition wants them in France. The quickest way to get them to France is to land in southern France, even though it's about as far from the major front as you can get and still be in France. Ironically, it turned out to be a relatively painless operation because the Germans had also realized that troops in southern France were about as far away from the important places as they could get, and had already started to withdraw.
And I was standing in the door ready to give the order to jump, and all I saw was clouds down there. And then the green light went on indicating to jump, and I didn't jump. I just waited because I wanted to see some kind of land or something. And finally somebody said, "Lieutenant, the green light's been on, we gotta go." So I said, "Okay, let's go." Well, we just made the beaches. If I had jumped when the green light went on, we'd have all been drowned. And in fact, our company commander, Captain Bing Miller, and his whole flight jumped when the green light went on, and they all went in the ocean. They were never seen again.
My plane was the third plane in line taking off. It was a dirt field, and it was dry, dopey, and it was so thick you couldn't see anything. The pilot was flying as though he was in a deep fog. He couldn't see anything. He got off the runway somehow, and because he wasn't on the runway, he couldn't get quite enough airspeed. We hit 2 or 3 big drainage ditches. Finally, he broke out of it a quarter of a mile off the runway, broke out of the dust, and right in front of him was a parked C-47, non-operational, and he did what any self-respecting pilot would do. He reared back on the stick, and we went right up in the air and stalled out and came right in on our nose, crashed. I got all of the men out, and out of the 18-man stick, 4 of us, 4 men and me, 5 of us, were still ambulatory, and I made arrangements with the local field there that when the planes came back, we went in individually, each in a glider. So I landed in southern France in a glider.
There were a lot of gliders in southern France. I mean, we really had to keep our eyes open for other gliders. We flew over the Mediterranean and went in about, well, it was about 10 miles in behind Cannes and Nice in southern Riviera. And so we had to pick out what was ever available, and this was a big area, but we knew it was a vineyard, and so we came in just as slow as we could. Nobody got hurt. Of course, the glider was a little beat up from steel posts in the vineyard.
Lost both wings, sailed along between 2 grape rows. The glider finally stopped, and the sides were gone, the wings were gone, because we went right down between 2 grape rows, steel stakes, steel wires, and we sat there for 5 minutes and ate fresh grapes right off the vines.
And then our assignment then was to attack directly east, right on the French Riviera. And so we traveled along, and we traveled in spurts, actually. The Germans had put up a rear guard resistance in front of to the west of each one of these towns.
We were kept on the line, and we fought from then until October in the mountains.
On the end of October, the Germans retreated. I'm not sure why. I've heard someone say that it had something to do with getting ready for the Ardennes offensive or the Battle of the Bulge.
And then we got pulled out of southern France. I think we're on the line 94 days in southern France. And we got pulled off the line, and we went up to Cesson-Soissons, 2 towns right out of Reims. And this is where the 82nd, 101st were. And we were starting to prepare to jump across the Rhine. Then on the 16th of December, the Germans decided otherwise, and they started to bulge. So we went up and we jumped into the bulge. We jumped out of the back of the truck. And of course, that's another story all of its own.
One of the big Allied advantages during World War II was the ability to intercept the radio transmissions and then decipher the coded messages that the Germans were sending. They didn't realize we could do this, and that gave us a tremendous advantage because we could tell what they were planning, where they were sending troops, and so forth. But as the Germans fell back on Germany, they actually ended up using more telephone lines than radio transmissions, and this allowed them to assemble a huge army to counterattack us in what would become known as the Bulge in the Ardennes forest area. We were totally unaware of this, and we thought it was going to be a quiet area of the front where there was nothing going to happen. The Germans seemed defeated. It was pretty much a pace of the war determined solely by us. But this was the last major counteroffensive attempted by the Germans, and its design was to not just attack and blow a hole through one part of our front, but also to reach Antwerp, which had become our major supply base forward that we needed in order to push into Germany.
We went back to Sweeps, France. We were recouping there. Most people had a couple of days to go into Paris. We had leaves, and I myself was in a ballet, the first and last ballet I've ever attended. And about halfway through it, over the speaker system, will Colonel so-and-so report to headquarters. A little while later, Major so-and-so report to headquarters. And then pretty soon, all the captains report to headquarters. And then after a while, he said, the ballet's over, everybody return to your quarters. And we were told then that we were, to get ready, we're headed for the Bulge. So spent most of the night getting ready, and 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, loaded on trucks and headed north.
We didn't have winter clothes. We had winter overcoats, no overshoes, and they moved us in semi-trucks, open trucks, and we stood just like toothpicks in these trucks, and if it got cold, we kept moving around trying to keep warm.
Oh yeah, it was a scramble to get as many people as far north as possible. We were the closest, really the closest reserve unit, so we were told to go on to the northern edge of the British salient in the Bulge. And the next day, the 101st followed us because they were farther away, and then they moved into Bastogne.
At the time of the Battle of the Bulge, the Theater Reserve, Eisenhower's Theater Reserve, consisted of the Airborne Corps, which was the 82nd Airborne and the 101st Airborne, both of them at Reims. And they were really his Theater Reserve, and they were among the first reserve troops committed. They were committed by motor. They were split up. The Corps headquarters in the 82nd Airborne Division ended up going north. The 101st Airborne Division went to Bastogne.
And we got into Bastogne. The first thing the Germans got is our hospital. They got all our medics, all our doctors, everything.
That night, it started snowing. The rain turned to snow during the night. And by next day, it was beginning to get white, and the snow built up pretty good, about a foot or so of snow on the ground. And it was cold. It got really, really cold. We did not have winter clothing. We had regular issue clothing it was a winter issue, but it was not for cold weather issue. And the only way you could survive was try to find something more to wear. Another pair of trousers, another sweater or coat or something to put on yourself.
The Germans really couldn't have much prospect of success in the offensive unless they had a sustained period of poor weather, because it kept the Allied air forces grounded. And the Allies had absolute air superiority at that time. And you really can't fight a mobile offensive without air superiority. Certainly you can't fight it in the teeth of enemy air superiority.
It was reported afterwards it was the worst winter that they had had in eastern Belgium in many years, and it was cold, snowy. When we got there, we really weren't prepared because we had left in a hurry and didn't have heavy protection.
Germans put up a pretty good fight, a hellacious fight. They threw everything at us. Like I say, kids, boys, old men, SS, you never knew what you were fighting.
And there was probably a third as many of us as there was the Germans on the outside.
And started through into some wooded area there, and there was a foxhole up there, and I went up and I dropped a hand grenade in that foxhole. And out of that foxhole came a German soldier, and he wasn't hurt. So it jarred him good, but it didn't physically hurt him. And he come out and he looked around, and he took a Luger out of he was carrying, looked around and handed it to a friend of mine, Snyder, the guy I'd helped carry out in Normandy. Old Snyder smiled at me and he stuck it in his coat. And we got fired on by a machine gun. It was right off to the front of where we'd been pointed. My friend Snyder's raising up. See, there's a rifleman and a machine gun up. He's trying to see where they are. I heard a rifle shot, and old Snyder just went over backwards like that. I thought, oh my God. I got up, I made a dash over, got down in the ditch where Snyder was, and he said, damn, he says, And he reached in his pocket, and that son of a bitch shot my Luger.
The big problems we had was the fact we got down in Bastogne to one, we had 6 mortar rounds per gun. And we had, I think, one box of machine gun ammo and 1 bandolier rifle fire. They could have come at us at that point and we would have had a big problem if they came at us full tilt.
And it's a miracle that we stopped the Germans. There was 5 or 6 Panzer divisions surrounding Bastogne, trying to get in, and we stopped them. And if they knew how low we were on ammunition, they would have walked in. When Patton finally come in with the tanks, he brought his ammunition. I had 1 mortar shell left, just 1.
Our platoon moved into Bastogne way over strength, 53 guys. We were about 7, I think, over strength. At the end of that day, as I recall, we were down to 15 or 16 guys.
It's hard for an airborne division by itself to stop a couple Panzer divisions. But it was fortunate, it was very fortunate to also take under command a number of the units that were in the area. So it ended up having a task force of the 10th Armored Division under command. So it had some tanks and mechanized infantry. There was a battalion of tank destroyers in the area, mechanized tank destroyers. So they were pretty heavily reinforced, and they ended up with a very good mix of armor, supporting firepower, tank destroyers, and of course some excellent infantry. I mean, the 101st Infantry was just superb infantry at that time.
But I had Germans tell us that you guys, Americans, are crazy. You don't know when you're beat. And I guess that was true, you know. We were beat at times, but I never entered my head to surrender.
They said, well, you're surrounded. Well, we knew we were surrounded. That wasn't a secret. We knew that before they announced it. But the comment was that the poor bastards, they got us surrounded, see. And it wasn't a problem for us, it was a problem for the Germans.
They could not make an all-out assault because they didn't know where the enemy was. And so that's why McAuliffe was in there for 20-odd days, 25 days, you know, because that's when the Germans went in and told them to surrender, and he said, nuts, and that became famous with McAuliffe.
And then about 2 or 3 days later, I think it was 2 days later, the skies opened up, and here comes the planes.
Once the weather cleared, things started going the other way. And once the weather cleared, that was, at that point the Germans had gotten about as far as they could hope to.
The last major airborne operation in Europe in World War II was conducted by the 17th Airborne that assisted in the Rhine crossing. While a lot of troops were carried across the Rhine in amphibious vehicles, the airborne troops landed on the other side in gliders and by parachute and seized key locations and prevented the Germans from moving forward to eliminate the bridgeheads as the troops crossed the Rhine.
Going across the Rhine, we came in much too high. And we were, you know, we were getting peppered by anti-aircraft flak.
We were given flak suits, a flak vest. That's why we sat on them, because it all come from down below. And you could hear them hit.
The British had laid a smoke screen along the Rhine River, and you couldn't see the ground until you got down, probably 300, 400 feet. when I broke out of the smoke, there was a beautiful pasture right before me. Made the best landing of my life. We started drawing sniper fire from a farmhouse. So my co-pilot and I decided, well, we'll get down there as close as we can, and maybe we can spray it with our Tommy guns. And we, on our way down, some airborne guys threw a couple of hand grenades in there, and the Germans took off and left.
Rhine crossing operation is one of the is certainly a meticulously planned operation, and there's increasing impatience with Montgomery for not getting it going, And it's ironic that by the time he launches his operation, the Germans have collapsed to such an extent, and he has prepped the operation so thoroughly that I think the 17th Airborne suffers more jump casualties than it does combat casualties.
Operation Varsity, the jump of the airborne forces across the Rhine River, is very successful. And after this operation, and as the Allied armies move across the Rhine, the airborne forces are used once again as infantry, as assault troops on the ground, not in airborne landings. And as they move deeper into Germany itself, they begin to encounter a variety of things, and one of those things is the absolute and unexpected horror that they discover as they free concentration camps.
We liberated the Woblin concentration camp. Oh, it's terrible. I mean, it's the people are stacked up like cordwood, maybe 10 deep or even more than that, and the ones underneath are dead, or the ones, maybe the first 2 layers on top are still alive, but they were so weak that they couldn't move. How people can forget that kind of stuff, I don't know.
God bless Dwight Eisenhower for one thing, if nothing else, and there's a lot of things to bless Dwight Eisenhower for, but one of them was making sure that the photographers, every photographer in the ETO, it seemed like, got into those camps and photographed it. And as I recall, his words, very prophetic words, were, you guys have got to photograph all of this, because in 50 years, some son of a bitch is going to say this never happened.
The people in town didn't know, or say they didn't know anything about this concentration camp, the German people. What we did with our officers and such, Gavin and such, when we liberated this concentration camp, they took and made the German townspeople, they made them dig up these graves, and we made them then take the bodies, all these dead bodies, just bone, skin and bone, and put in these graves. And so they're in those graves today.
It was the first concentration camp I'd ever seen. I hope I never see another one. It was pretty horrible. But then the war was practically over then. That was the end of April and 1st of May, and there was no more fighting left.
I was back in Paris for a load of supplies when the word came that the war was over. And I sat up in a hotel looking out toward the Champs-Élysées and this big broad avenue. There were thousands of people there screaming and hollering and shouting and everything.
By then, our squadron had been overseas, just almost 3 years overseas. So from Africa clear through to the crossing of the Rhine. And of course, at that time, I opted to go back to England. And frankly, I'd had enough combat. I didn't want to go to the Asian theater at all.
While the larger and more well-known airborne operations were conducted in the European theater, what is not known by many people is that there were several very successful airborne operations that were conducted during the fighting in the Pacific. They jumped in small groups and several times in several places, in the New Guinea campaign and also in the Philippines, to pave the way for the landings. They were also used as elite infantrymen in some of the jungle fighting on the islands.
In Leyte, we did get into some combat. There was a lot of Japanese fleeing up into the Leyte Hills, and it was our job to go on up there and cut them off, which we did. Pretty elusive enemy, not fun to fight.
And then from Leyte we went to Luzon, swung around south of Manila to a place called Nasupo. We were there to seal off the city, actually, so the Japs couldn't get out. Now, there was high ground outside of Manila, and the 11th Airborne Regiment jumped on that high ground, secured it, and then joined the 11th Division that was coming up by road and went into Manila.
While American forces are still fighting for the city of Manila, the 503rd Regimental Combat Team makes perhaps one of the most daring and difficult airborne assaults of the war by parachuting in on Corregidor Island with its very small landing zones, rough terrain, and elite Japanese defenders.
It was bad. It was tough. There were thousands and thousands of Japanese on the rock, and that there were things going on in there, and that they were coming out of the rocks at night, attacking the paratroopers on topside and stuff. So, you know, the guys had to stay alert and take care of business, and also that a lot of guys missed the cliff and went into the ocean.
That was a little bit dicey because it was such a small landing area. So they had to jump sticks of about 5 at a time rather than a normal 20. The Japanese committed suicide, a lot of them. And there was one large cave that the Americans were approaching, and it had a lot of munitions in it, I guess, and the Japanese blew it up. Of course, they killed themselves, and they killed a lot of Americans, too, because they were that close that the blast got them. So it's sort of a nasty operation.
With the city of Manila and Corregidor now secure, and with the fighting in the Philippines winding down, and with the war ending in Europe, Allied forces now begin to redeploy into the Pacific for the final assault on the Japanese home islands, codenamed Operation Olympic. And that operation, or part of that operation, was planned to be an airborne assault, which would have undoubtedly been costly, and that's a jump that thankfully they didn't have to make.
We were coming back to the States to be ready and trained and to jump on Japan. And halfway across the Atlantic, coming home, they dropped the bomb. Then they dropped the other bomb, and the war was over. The minute we arrived back in New York, I was one of the first to be let go. And all I could think about was get out and go home. And I think that was true of all the young men.
We went to the memorial there at Caen, where they have these 9,000, almost 10,000 graves. And after it was over, I started walking away, and this elderly Frenchman came up. He put his arms around me and said, "I want to thank you, Yanks, for what you did." Pretty emotional. You know, we didn't think that they liked the Americans.
Was I a hero? No, but I was surrounded by people who were. And I think most of them feel the same way as I do about it. A hero, no.